playoff rankings. They were revealed last night. The big change in the top 8, Ohio State dropping 4 spots to number 6 after losing to Michigan. And because of that, you've got the Wolverines, Washington, Florida State, Oregon all moved up a single spot. And all of the top 8, except for the Buckeyes, will be playing this weekend in conference championship games. So let's bring in Heather Dinich, Paul Finebaum. They get up with us this morning. Heather, Alabama sits at number 8. They're facing number 1 Georgia this weekend. Does Alabama control its own playoff destiny, you think?
I think that's pushing it a little bit. Alabama needs to beat Georgia, and the best path forward for the Tide would be to have Texas lose or have Florida State lose. Because if you have Texas lose, then you no longer have to worry about that head-to-head result in Tuscaloosa in week 2. If Texas wins, the selection committee has a very difficult decision between Alabama's strength of schedule, which would include a win against the committee's number 1 team, and the Texas head-to-head win in week 2. Those are not weighted. It means something different to each committee member. But then on the flip side, you've got Alabama. If Florida State loses, you could have Alabama and Texas in there together. That would be a much easier solution for the selection committee.
Okay, Paul, you heard Heather talking about if Texas loses. Listen, I know they took that loss, obviously, to Oklahoma earlier in the season. But if Alabama and Texas should win Saturday, should Alabama or Texas, which one should be in the top 4, you think?
Well, I think we're looking at the wrong 2 schools, Brian. To me, it should be about Florida State. And I know what everyone wants to say, and I don't want to upset my dear friend Heather, but I don't really care about the argument that Florida State is a undefeated Power 5 champion. I mean, so what? They're beating Louisville, which lost to a pedestrian Kentucky team last week. To me, Alabama and Texas are razor close. I'll give Alabama the edge for one reason, because they would have beaten the biggest bully in the land, and that should count for something. That game on September 9th is important, but it's not very important to me, because when my eyes look at college football, I will see a better team in Alabama. And I don't want to drag Marcus Spears into this, but he played in the SEC, and he knows it's a lot different conference than the ACC and the Big 12 right now.
So if that's the case, then you heard Paul talking about the biggest bully, Heather. In this scenario, could number 1 Georgia, do you think they could drop out of the playoff with a loss Sunday to Alabama?
Yes, absolutely.
Really?
It's never happened before.
But Heather, this is a team that's won like 29 straight games. It would be their only loss. Yes. Are you going to tell me they would fall out?
The selection committee is not judging Georgia on those past 20 games or those past 2 back-to-back national titles. I know Paul is beside himself right now, but hold on one second, because the difference this year is that there are more contenders out there. And I know Paul is talking about Florida State, but they did beat an SEC team, a top 20 SEC team in LSU, and that's part of the resume that will have them in the top 4 if they beat their 3rd top 25 team, Louisville. Go, Paul, go.
Yeah, that was about 8 years ago, Heather, but that's fine. I think these things do have to count. But, I mean, this is why college football is so insanely fun, but it also makes people like me have their head exploded. And at my age, I can't afford my head to do anything other than to stay on straight. I mean, this is literally absurd, these conversations we're having. But sadly, that's what we have right now in college football, as opposed to a legitimate playoff like the NFL and like hopefully college football will have next year.
Listen, I still got a couple more questions for you guys. I know we're going to have you back in the next hour. We'll certainly get into those as well. Heather, Paul, thank you very much. Alabama sits at number 8, facing number 1 Georgia this weekend. You think Alabama, do they control their own playoff destiny, in your opinion?
They're not a lock if they win the SEC. There would be a great debate, particularly if Texas wins the Big 12, because then the selection committee would have to have a conversation between Alabama's strength of schedule, which would be better than the Longhorns, against Texas's Week 2 win in Tuscaloosa, which continues to resonate to this point. But I have to remind everyone, head-to-head is not the only factor in the room. It's one of several tiebreakers, including a conference championship and strength of schedule. If Alabama gets in with Texas, Florida State would have to lose. So Alabama winning the SEC is obviously a must. To get in with Texas, Florida State needs to lose. To avoid the debate with the Longhorns, Texas needs to lose.
Okay, Paul, what about those Longhorns? What if Alabama and Texas win on Saturday? Should Alabama or Texas, which one should be in that top 4?
Both should be in. And Heather, calm down here for a second as I get to my point that I know you're getting tired of hearing. Florida State is a good team. They're not a great team. And they're, in my estimation, they're not in the same league as Alabama and Texas. Why? Because their best player is no longer playing, and that should matter a great deal. Jordan Travis is the heart and soul of that team. They were on his back the entire year when they beat LSU 4 months ago and when they went to Clemson a couple weeks later. By the way, neither all that impressive, especially when you compare that to what Alabama would have to do to be part of this conversation. And that's to beat the biggest bully in college football, the Georgia Bulldogs. They're number 1. Shouldn't that count for something? They lost to Texas on September 9th. I get it, but we're having the wrong debate here.
Okay, so let's talk about number 1, Heather, because I know we talked about this last hour, and my mind exploded when you answered this. So you're trying to tell me if number 1, Georgia, they lose to Alabama, they could be knocked out of the playoffs, considering this is a team that's won 29 straight? They would be done when we're talking about the college football playoffs.
Quite possibly. It could be unprecedented. No number 1 team has ever fallen out of the top 4 on selection day. This could be the first because there are so many other contenders. And the bar in the committee reading room to finish in the top 4 without winning your conference is extremely high. Georgia would be banking on 3 wins against top 25 opponents, which is very good in the last 4 weeks. But it might not be enough if everybody else wins out.
Yeah, Paul, you're shaking your head. Go ahead.
Yeah, you know what this reminds me of? When I was a kid, unlike Spears and Saturday, I mean, I wasn't chosen to be the starting whatever. I mean, I'm waving my hand on Pop Warner. Call on me, and that's what we're doing. We're basically saying, okay, Paul Finebaum, you can't play worth a lick, but you deserve to be in here because you're a Power 5 champion. That is absurd. It makes me want to scream because of the stupidity of it.
I love this. Real quick. Last year, Ohio State got in, didn't play in the conference championship game. Any way, Paul, do you see Ohio State getting back in there at all?
Do you see Frank Wright getting another head coaching job in the NFL? They're not getting in.
Shots fired. No, sir.
Give me something.